Today General Hospital will reveal interesting details on Thursday, September 18, 2025. First, Brit had to swallow her pride as she stood before her mother, Liesl, who was seething with anger. Her return to Port Charles had been long anticipated, but the reunion was far from joyful. Liesl had spent years mourning the loss of her daughter, believing her to be dead. There was nothing more heartbreaking for a mother than to think she had lost her child forever. The years of grief, pain, and unanswered questions had left Liesl bitter, and now, with the truth in front of her, the emotions were overwhelming. Brit had never intended for her mother to endure such pain, but her reasons for concealing the truth seemed to fall on deaf ears. Brit tried to explain herself, offering the reasons why she had stayed hidden all these years. She wasn't just trying to protect herself, she had believed that Liesl would never accept the reality of her survival. Brit knew how dangerous their world could be, and keeping her existence a secret was the only way she could ensure both their safety. She had stayed away to protect her mother from the enemies that still lurked in the shadows. Despite her best intentions, however, Liesl couldn't see past the pain of the deception. The years of mourning, the endless nights of wondering, had left scars on Liesl that were hard to heal. It was a painful confrontation, but Brit didn't give up. She knew that her mother's anger was rooted in love, and that made the situation all the more heartbreaking. Liesl's fury wasn't just about the deception, it was about the years she had lost, thinking that Brit was gone. She had missed out on watching her daughter grow, experiencing the milestones of her life, and that grief was something Brit could never truly undo. Still, Brit wasn't ready to give up on their relationship. She had spent so many years running, hiding, and living in the shadows. Now, facing her mother, she couldn't bear to walk away without trying to make things right. In the days that followed, Brit took every opportunity to show Liesl just how much she cared. She spent time with her mother, trying to make up for the years they had lost. Despite Liesl's anger, Brit didn't shy away from her responsibilities as a daughter. She knew that repairing the bond with her mother would take time, but she was determined. She made it clear that she was here to stay. No longer the daughter hiding in the shadows, but a woman ready to face the consequences of her actions and rebuild what had been broken. Through each small gesture, Brit slowly began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. She was there for her mother in ways she hadn't been able to before. Whether it was helping Liesl with daily tasks or offering comfort during difficult moments, Brit proved that her return was not just about easing her own guilt, but about making things right for the woman who had raised her. Liesl, despite her anger, began to soften, realizing that her daughter had truly come back for her, not just for herself. The road to reconciliation wasn't smooth. Liesl's wounds ran deep, and there were moments when it felt like the past would forever haunt them. Yet, Brit persevered. She understood that healing took time, and that some wounds would never fully fade. But through her actions and unwavering commitment, Brit began to show her mother the love she had been hiding for so long. With every passing day, the bond between them grew stronger, and the weight of the past slowly began to lift. By the time Liesl had started to accept Brit's presence in her life again, Brit had learned a valuable lesson. The road to redemption wasn't paved with easy answers or quick fixes, but with love, patience, and the willingness to confront the past head-on. Brit had made mistakes, but she was determined to make amends. And in doing so, she not only healed her fractured relationship with her mother, but also found a deeper understanding of the power of family, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of love. Second, after receiving the devastating news that his mother, Monica, had passed away suddenly, Jason was engulfed in grief. The shock of her death hit him like a wave, and the sorrow weighed heavily on his heart. Monica had always been a pillar of strength in the Quartermain family, and losing her felt like losing a part of himself. Jason had always been her son, and in his eyes, she was invincible. To know she was gone, to know that he had no chance to say goodbye, was an unbearable pain that seemed to swallow him whole. The absence of her steady presence left an emptiness that was impossible to fill, and Jason found himself struggling to breathe under the weight of it. To make matters more complicated, Drew was still in the hospital, his condition keeping him from being able to make any arrangements for the funeral. Drew had always been Jason's brother, even if their relationship had been complicated at times. Now, Drew's own health issues kept him from stepping into the role that Jason knew his brother would have taken in organizing the ceremony. withdrew unable to handle the practicalities. The burden of planning Monica's funeral fell largely on Jason's shoulders. But even in his grief, Jason knew that he had to be strong. The family needed him, and there was no time to wallow in his own despair. He had to make sure everything was taken care of, despite the overwhelming sorrow that clouded his mind. Jason returned to his mother's side during the final moments of her passing. He had always known Monica was a strong woman, but he hadn't realized just how much he relied on her until she was gone. Standing beside her, with the weight of finality settling in, Jason struggled to come to terms with the fact that he would never again hear her voice or feel her comforting presence. In the quiet room, Jason found himself overwhelmed with memories of his childhood, the moments that defined their relationship, and the many times she had been his rock. The reality of her death hit him with a fierce intensity, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was more he could have done, more time they could have had together. The pain was not only Jason's to bear. The entire Quartermain family was deeply affected by Monica's sudden passing, and Tracy, Jason's sister, was no exception. Tracy had always been a complicated character, strong, resilient, and sometimes difficult to understand, but her bond with her sister Monica was undeniable. They had shared years of family history, of triumphs and heartaches, and Monica's death left a void that was felt by Tracy as much as it was by Jason. Although Tracy had often clashed with her family over the years, the loss of her sister brought her own vulnerability to the surface. For the first time in a long while, Tracy found herself emotionally raw, struggling to cope with the loss of the one person who had always been there for her. Tracy, ever pragmatic, tried to keep her composure in front of Jason, but the sorrow was written across her face. She had lost a sister, a companion, someone she had shared her life with for decades. Jason could see the pain in her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, they shared a connection that went beyond their usual strained relationship. The loss of Monica had brought them together in a way that nothing else had. For both Jason and Tracy, this moment of grief became a quiet reminder of how fragile life was and how important it was to hold onto the family they still had left. As the two siblings stood together, remembering their mother and the incredible impact she had on their lives, there was a shared understanding between them. This was a moment of connection, of mourning, and of mutual support. Tracy, despite her usual reserve, allowed herself to lean on Jason for the first time in years. She, too, was grieving the loss of Monica in her own way, and together they found solace in the shared experience of loss. There was no need for words, the silence between them spoke volumes. They understood the depth of their mother's impact and what her absence meant for their family moving forward. Despite the grief, there was a sense of unity in their shared sorrow. The death of Monica had fractured their world, but it also reminded Jason and Tracy of the importance of family. In the aftermath of such a devastating loss, Jason knew that it was up to him and his family to pull together. The funeral arrangements had to be made, and despite the emotional turmoil, he understood that it was time to honor his mother's life. But for a brief moment, as he stood next to Tracy, Jason allowed himself to be vulnerable, to acknowledge the depth of the pain, and to understand that in this moment of loss, the bond between family members could offer them a glimmer of comfort. Jason and Tracy's shared moment of mourning, in the midst of Monica's passing, was one of those rare instances where their complicated relationship softened, and they found a mutual understanding that transcended their differences. It was in their vulnerability and shared grief that they were able to reconnect, if only for a fleeting moment. As the days moved forward and the funeral approached, Jason knew that this was only the beginning of the emotional journey that lay ahead for him and his family. The pain of losing Monica would never fully fade, but in her memory, Jason and Tracy would find the strength to carry on, knowing that family, despite its flaws and divisions, remained the most important thing they had. Third, Charlotte sat in front of Lulu, her face a mask of concern, but beneath her composure, Lulu could see the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. It wasn't just about Valentine, though that issue loomed large in their conversation. Charlotte, who had always tried to maintain a sense of strength, finally allowed herself to be vulnerable in front of Lulu. The weight of the situation had become too much for her to carry alone. Lulu listened attentively, her own heart heavy with concern, knowing that Charlotte's worry was rooted in more than just her father's fate. The young girl had inherited her father's determination, and Lulu knew that if Charlotte's emotions were pushed any further, she would not hesitate to take matters into her own hands. Lulu's mind raced as Charlotte spoke. She had been trying to hold it together, but the more she heard, the more the fear set in. Brennan, the man with the power to decide Valentine's fate, had made demands that Lulu wasn't sure she could live with. The idea that her daughter might be involved in this dangerous situation made Lulu feel like she was losing control. What Brennan asked was nothing short of a threat to their family's safety, but if it meant saving Valentine, who Charlotte adored, Lulu knew she might have no choice but to comply. Her maternal instincts were screaming at her to protect Charlotte at all costs, to keep her far away from the turmoil that surrounded Valentine and the dangerous power plays that Brennan was orchestrating. Yet, Lulu could not ignore the reality that sometimes, sacrifices had to be made to protect the ones you love. As Charlotte finished speaking, Lulu took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. She didn't want her daughter to get involved in a situation that could lead to her harm. Charlotte was too young, too innocent, and Lulu couldn't bear the thought of putting her in danger. But at the same time, Lulu knew that Brennan wasn't the type to back down easily. His demands were clear. If they wanted Valentine back, they had to follow through with his terms. And in this situation, it seemed like the only way to keep everyone safe was to navigate the treacherous waters Brennan was pushing them into. The thought of exposing Charlotte to that world made Lulu's stomach turn, but if she didn't act, the consequences could be worse than she could imagine. Lulu couldn't deny the truth in what Charlotte was saying. If Charlotte knew the full extent of what was at stake, she wouldn't hesitate to push for a meeting with her father, no matter the cost. Valentine's disappearance had left a hole in Charlotte's heart, one that nothing could fill. Lulu knew how much her daughter longed to be with him, to have him back in her life. But Lulu also understood the gravity of the situation. If she allowed Charlotte to get too involved, if she let her push forward with the idea of meeting Valentine, there was no telling where that might lead. Lulu had to find a way to balance Charlotte's desires with the reality of the danger they were all facing. With every passing moment, Lulu felt the pressure mount. It wasn't just about her own fear for Charlotte's safety, it was about the family. She couldn't lose Valentine, not after everything they had been through. And yet, the thought of putting Charlotte in harm's way to bring him back felt like a betrayal. Was it worth it? Would saving Valentine be worth the potential cost? Her heart twisted with indecision, and she couldn't escape the feeling that whatever decision she made, there would be no turning back. The stakes were too high, and Lulu knew that every choice she made now would impact not only her life but Charlotte's as well. As she listened to Charlotte, Lulu's mind kept returning to Brennan's demands. They weren't just manipulative, they were dangerous. Yet, in the twisted game that was playing out, there was no room for idealism. It wasn't about what she wanted or even what was morally right, it was about survival. Lulu knew that Brennan wasn't someone she could negotiate with lightly. His power, his knowledge of their family's vulnerabilities, made him a threat that couldn't be ignored. The thought of negotiating with him made her stomach churn, but if she didn't, she risked losing everything: Valentine, Charlotte's safety, and the tenuous peace they had managed to hold onto for so long. The decision weighed on Lulu's mind as she tried to reason with herself. She loved her daughter more than anything in the world, and there was nothing she wouldn't do to protect her. But there was also a part of her that understood the harsh realities of the world they lived in. Valentine's fate was intertwined with their family's future, and if Lulu didn't act, there was no guarantee that anyone would emerge unscathed. It was a painful choice, but one that Lulu knew she might have to make in order to keep Charlotte safe. The fear of losing Valentine was paralyzing, but the thought of exposing Charlotte to a life of danger and deceit was almost worse. In the silence that followed Charlotte's words, Lulu made a promise to herself. She would find a way to do what was necessary to protect her daughter, even if that meant making deals with people like Brennan. She had no illusions about the cost, knew it would be high. But in the end, it was the only option she had. As Charlotte looked up at her, waiting for a response, Lulu held her daughter's gaze, knowing that this moment would forever change the course of their lives. Whatever decision Lulu made, she knew she couldn't protect Charlotte from everything. The world was too dangerous, and sometimes, the only choice left was to navigate that darkness together, no matter the consequences. Fourth, Joe had never felt more desperate than in that moment when he realized Outback, Emma's beloved dog, had gone missing. The bond between Emma and the dog was unbreakable, and the thought of her heartbreak pushed Joe to act quickly. After searching the usual places, and with nightfall approaching, Joe knew that he needed help. The only person he could think of who might have the resources to help him in a way that could actually make a difference was Sonny. Sonny, with his connections and his access to various means of transportation, seemed like the perfect person to turn to. Without hesitation, Joe reached out to Sonny, explaining the situation and his need for a vehicle to cover more ground in the search for Outback. Sonny, ever the reliable ally when it came to helping those he cared about, agreed to lend Joe one of his cars. Joe's gratitude was palpable, knowing that this simple gesture could help him extend the search radius. As Joe climbed into Sonny's car and sped off into the night, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. Emma was counting on him, and he would not let her down. The roads blurred as he passed through neighborhoods, scanning the streets for any sign of the missing dog. But as the hours stretched on, Joe's hope began to dwindle. It seemed like the more he drove, the further Outback seemed to be. But Joe refused to give up. He had to find the dog, for Emma's sake. But what he didn't realize was that this search would lead him to something far more dangerous than he had anticipated. As Joe continued his search, he turned into a particularly desolate street on the outskirts of town. It was dark, with only the occasional streetlight casting eerie shadows on the pavement. That's when he noticed something strange. A car, parked in an alley, seemed out of place. Joe's instincts kicked in. He recognized the carrot was linked to Sidwell, the powerful and elusive figure whose criminal activities had been a thorn in Sonny's side for years. Joe's heart raced as he cautiously approached the vehicle. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, but there was something about this moment that felt different. As he stepped out of Sonny's car, he felt the cold air bite into his skin. But it wasn't the chill that made him uneasy, it was the feeling that he was on the brink of discovering something that could change everything. Upon closer inspection, Joe noticed something even more suspicious: a set of documents partially visible through the car window. He wasn't sure what they were at first, but something about the way they were arranged struck him as odd. It looked like someone had been in a hurry to hide them. Without thinking, Joe retrieved the papers, slipping them from the car. As he scanned them, his eyes widened in disbelief. The documents contained information that could bring Sidwell to his knees. They were financial records, along with a series of coded communications that pointed to a major corruption scheme involving Sidwell and several other high-profile individuals. Joe's mind raced as he realized the magnitude of what he had just found. This wasn't just about a missing dog anymore. He had stumbled upon evidence that could topple one of the most dangerous figures in town. As Joe processed what he had uncovered, he knew that this wasn't something he could ignore. He had to bring this information to Sonny immediately. The implications were too great, and Sonny, with his vast network, could use these documents to expose Sidwell's operation. But Joe also understood the risks involved. If Sidwell found out that someone had gotten their hands on these papers, the consequences could be deadly. Joe had no time to waste. He knew that bringing the documents to Sonny could be the key to ending Sidwell's reign of terror, but it would also put him in the crosshairs of a very dangerous man. Nevertheless, he couldn't let fear dictate his actions. Emma, the missing dog, and now this, a potential game-changer in Sonny's war against Sidwell. Everything had led to this moment. After carefully securing the documents, Joe made his way back to Sonny's place. His mind raced with the possibilities, and a part of him hoped that he was wrong, that these papers didn't hold the power he feared they did. But as he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a sharp turn. This discovery could change everything for Sonny and his fight against Sidwell, but it could also place Joe in far more danger than he had anticipated. The risks were high, but so were the stakes. As he arrived at Sonny's compound, he quickly relayed what had happened, showing him the documents. Sonny's expression turned from concern for Outback to something far more intense as he examined the papers. Sonny's reaction was one of silent acknowledgement. He didn't need Joe to explain the gravity of what he had found. Sonny recognized the significance immediately. The documents were the missing link in the investigation that had eluded him for so long. With this evidence in hand, he could now make a move against Sidwell that would destroy the man's operations for good. The powerful connections Sidwell had made over the years were about to crumble, and Sunny knew that this discovery could be the turning point in his long-standing battle with the crime boss. But even as Sunny planned his next steps, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude toward Joe. What started as a simple favor to help find a lost dog had now turned into an opportunity to bring down one of the most dangerous men in the city. In the following days, Sunny worked tirelessly to leverage the documents Joe had found, carefully building his case against Sidwell. The plan to expose Sidwell and his criminal empire was taking shape, and for the first time in a long while, Sunny felt like he was finally in control. The information Joe had unearthed had given him the upper hand, but it also came with a price. Joe had now unknowingly placed himself in the line of fire, and Sunny couldn't help but feel a responsibility to protect him, just as Joe had taken it upon himself to help Sunny in his time of need. The search for Outback had led to an unexpected turn of events, and while the dog was still missing, Gio's bravery had just given Sunny the means to strike a decisive blow against Sidwell. The stakes had never been higher, and with Gio's discovery, Sunny knew that they were one step closer to victory no matter the cost. Finally, Molly had always prided herself on being open and honest, the type of person who wore her heart on her sleeve. But there was something inside her now, a secret that weighed heavily on her chest, gnawing at her every day. It wasn't something she had planned to hide, nor was it something she wanted to keep from those she loved. But life had a way of presenting challenges, and in this case, the challenge was one that threatened to unravel everything she had worked so hard to build. The secret was simple in its nature, but complicated in its implications. Molly had found herself in a situation that no one could have predicted, one that pushed her into a corner where her only option seemed to be silence. She wasn't sure when it started, but over time, it became clear that this secret could tear apart the very fabric of her family's trust. The deeper she got into the situation, the harder it became to confront. And so, she buried it deep within herself, choosing to live with the weight rather than risk revealing it. Every interaction with her loved ones became strained as Molly struggled to keep up the appearance of normalcy. Her relationship with her family, once solid and unbreakable, began to fray at the edges. She couldn't help but feel the guilt that simmered under the surface, eating away at her peace of mind. She knew that by keeping this secret, she was distancing herself from the people who mattered most to her. But what could she do? Telling the truth could cost her everything: her reputation, her relationships, and possibly even her future. As the days wore on, Molly began to notice the cracks in her own demeanor. She was more withdrawn, more guarded, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Her family, especially her closest confidants, began to notice that something was off, but Molly was quick to brush off their concerns. How could she tell them the truth? What if they couldn't understand? The fear of rejection, of being judged, held her back. It felt safer to keep the secret than to risk opening up, no matter how much it hurt. But despite her best efforts to bury it, the secret began to seep out in small ways. Her behavior became erratic at times, and she found herself lashing out over trivial matters. It wasn't intentional, of course. It was just that the pressure of the secret was becoming too much to bear. Each passing day felt like a countdown to the moment when everything would come crashing down, and Molly would have to face the consequences of her silence. There was a part of her that yearned to tell someone, to finally unload the burden she had been carrying for so long. But each time she thought about revealing the truth, a wave of dread washed over her. What would happen if she told the people she loved? Would they still see her the same way, or would they look at her with disappointment, as if the person they had known was somehow gone? It was a risk that felt too great to take. One night, as Molly sat alone in her room, staring out of the window at the moonlit sky, she realized that keeping the secret was no longer sustainable. It was eating her alive, and she couldn't continue to live this way. She knew that facing the truth, no matter how painful, was the only way to regain her peace of mind. But first, she would need the courage to share it, to admit to herself and to others that she had been hiding something so important. It would take time, but Molly knew that the secret she had kept hidden for so long would soon come to light, and she would have to face the consequences, whatever they might be.